So more on solitude. And there is a fine line between solitude and isolation. And I know for many people right now, isolation has been a challenge. As somebody who enjoys solitude, I know full well the difference because also as someone with a chronic illness, I know that it can be isolating. So to me, here's the difference that I want you to consider. Solitude is about having your own time and space for yourself, whether it's for reflection, meditation, um, taking a break from tasks that you may need to do, taking a break from other people. That is not antisocial. That is just part of how we are. Sometimes we need our own time to ourselves. Um, Isolation in terms of illness sometimes is a necessity where we need to have time alone so that we can recuperate from whatever is going on. And especially in the case of a chronic illness or a long-term illness, that may be difficult not only for us, but also for the people who know us because they are used to us being social in a certain way. And while we are recuperating from whether it's a surgery or whether it's an illness that we are going to have to just take time to rest and stay close to home, and we can't do the things we usually did. Um, it makes us feel isolated when we have to do that. And it also is a challenge for those who know us because they want us to be the way that we always were. Um, None of us are always the way we always were ever. We're always changing. And sometimes our health challenges, whether they are physical or mental, are going to require that we hunker down and take care of ourselves and make a quiet space where we can recuperate. Maybe that is with people that we are close to, and maybe that means we need to be free of the stimulus of other people around us for whatever period of time. That being said, when one is dealing with recuperating from an illness, especially if it's a chronic illness, and isolation has been part of the self-care that has been necessary, what happens is that a habit of being isolated comes to pass. And that is something that not only the person who is isolated may not recognize, but also the people around them may not recognize. This especially happens with people as they get older. Um, it also happens with people who have chronic illnesses or mental illnesses that make it difficult for them to socialize in a way that our culture expects people to do. Well, now that we're in this COVID era, guess what? Everything has changed. And I hope one of the things that has changed is this idea of how we are supposed to socialize. And some of us can socialize more than others. Some of us may have an illness that makes it difficult for us to socialize, and there is no stigma in that. And I think that is a big problem with our culture, is that it does not allow for people to be ill and people to recuperate. And that is something that we will all do, not just once in our life, but probably more than once in our life. That being said, being isolated out of habit because one has been ill or because one no longer feels that they fit in to society because they're limited is also a problem. So this is why, and I live in a community with a lot of older people, older than me, who are pretty much isolated because of health problems. This is long before COVID. Um, most of them physical, some of them physical and mental. And part of the reason they're isolated is that they don't have as large of a social circle as they used to have. They're not able to do that. So if you are a neighbor of somebody like that, as I am, um, try to check in on them now and again. It's not to force them to be social. It's a simple matter of just acknowledging that they're present, that you know that they're there. Maybe you're running to the grocery store and you can knock on their door and say, "Is there anything you need that I could pick up for you?" That may sound like a small thing. It's actually not. It's a huge thing. That is a connection, and that connection helps, as small as it is. The third step to thinking about someone being isolated is sometimes people can isolate themselves from new people because they are afraid, because they're anxious, they're afraid to try new things, they don't trust input from people who are different than them, so they try to keep a small circle around them that thinks like them. I would actually call that isolationism. And when people start to get isolated in that kind of way, they become less human, they become less of themselves because they become less social. So here we are at the full circle of what it means about solitude. Solitude is part of, but not the only part, of how to be a social human being. We are a species, and we are not the only one. There are many other species like us who depend upon the ability to be social in order to thrive, not just survive, in order to grow, not just physically, but also mentally and emotionally. We do that. The biggest way we do that is through language and through speaking with one another. So if we're doing that all the time and we have no time for ourselves, for solitude, we have no time for reflection. So we'd have no time to ingest and digest and reflect upon what our experience has been with other people. On the flip side, if we are isolated, we are not getting that socialization that is actually an intrinsic part of our human nature. So when you're thinking about being isolated more than maybe you've been used to because of the lack of activities available to you that you used to rely upon because of the change in societal norms due to COVID, approach it as number one, a chance to build solitude into your life, but on the other hand, a chance to really reflect upon, am I really isolated? How can I reach out to other people, whether it's by literally, no, like it's a phone. Yeah, I know, it's a flip phone. I am that generation. I use a flip phone. But I use this to talk to people, not to text. So if you can't talk to somebody in person, maybe you can talk to them online with virtual FaceTime, or you can talk to them on the phone, or you can actually do something, which is what I did for many, many years with a good friend of mine, send letters. So there's always ways to keep in touch. If you feel too isolated, let people around you know, and that may be your neighbors. Just let them know. It's like a simple thing, such as, if you go to the grocery store, could I ask you to pick something up for me? It's not a big thing to do. It builds community. It's a small gesture with huge positive consequences. If you find yourself sticking to the same crowd of people that you are familiar with, I would certainly encourage you to reach out to getting to know people, even on the most superficial level, who maybe you would not normally speak with or have an interaction with. Just so that you know there are other people there. The more people we keep in touch with, the more social we are. And the more social we are, combined with having our own space and time to have our solitude, the better human being we are. Every time I go to the grocery store, I always have a conversation with the checker at the counter. I mean, that is part of my socialization. They are part of my neighborhood. They know me, I know them, we know each other by name. So it's a small thing, but it's a huge thing. That way, I don't feel isolated. And having been in a space where I had to spend a lot of time at home by myself because of health conditions, I can tell you that even those little interactions make a huge difference. Um, Even though, I mean, there's no earth-shattering communication that goes on. It's okay. It's fine. Um, So when you're thinking about feeling isolated, think about how you're using that time when you cannot associate with people when you normally would. How are you using that time? Are you using it for yourself, or do you feel isolated? If you feel isolated, how can you reach out and communicate with people in a way that is meaningful in the moment, where you hear somebody else's voice or see somebody else's face? And it doesn't take very long. And also, if you are dealing with, if you're one of the people who is dealing with something like long COVID or another chronic illness, and it requires that you have to spend time by yourself just to recuperate, that is part of the healing process. Your body needs that downtime. And people around you may not understand that. I am also going to encourage you to realize that you may not understand that. As a healthcare provider, I can tell you that is as necessary to self-care as what you eat, what kind of exercise you do, when you sleep, how much you work, how much you don't work, all of those things. But if all you can do is lie down because you were too tired because of an illness, that's all right. Give yourself permission to do that. And if the people around you don't quite understand that, ask them to think about the fact that the time you do that helps you get better. On the other hand, if you are becoming more isolated out of fear or out of anxiety, think about how you can change that, because that is the kind of isolation that is not going to be healthy for you, either physically or emotionally or mentally. And it doesn't mean you need to go out and party. That's not, it's not an all or nothing game here. Solitude is about, yes, have time for yourself and then have time for the other people in your life as is appropriate for what you can do. If you need to be isolated because you have an illness and you need to recuperate, give yourself permission and ask those around you to allow you to do that, because that is part of healing. But don't shut yourself off. So I'll have more thoughts on solitude and other things next time I talk to you. And a happy new year to everybody. Bye.